August 28, 1944. Dust swirls through the shattered orchards near Verdun, France. Inside a requisitioned stone farmhouse, General George S. Patton paces a pistol on his hip, a map spread across a scarred oak table. His Third Army has raced for 100 miles in 3 weeks, crushing German rear guards, liberating towns, before their names reached Allied headquarters. Now, just 70 miles from the German border, his fuel trucks sit empty. Yet in his mind, the war could be over by Christmas if only he's given the green light. Outside, the rumble of distant thunder mixes with the growl of idling Shermans. Winter is coming. And so is a decision that will shape the final months of the war. By late August 1944, the Allies had shattered Nazi defenses in Normandy. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, had torn open the German left flank. Through that breach, Patton's newly activated Third Army had poured unleashed like a flood after weeks of careful build-up. In just 18 days, his armored columns covered more ground than the Allies had in the previous 2 months. Towns fell with astonishing speed: Le Mans, Orleans, Chartres. By August 25, Paris was liberated not by Patton, but by General Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division under General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group, a political nod to the French resistance. German forces were in disarray. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge's Army Group B collapsed during the Falaise Pocket, where tens of thousands of Wehrmacht troops were killed or captured trying to escape encirclement. Yet despite the chaos, remnants of the German army, often leaderless, undersupplied, but still dangerous, streamed eastward, regrouping with astonishing resilience. Hitler, refusing retreat, ordered a new defensive line, the Westwall, known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line. For the Allies, victory felt imminent. Morale soared. Soldiers spoke openly of being home by Thanksgiving. Intelligence reports underestimated German capacity to recover. What few realized was that the Allies' greatest enemy was no longer just the Wehrmacht, it was distance, time, and the vanishing trickle of gasoline. The euphoria of the breakout masked a deepening crisis. Logistics were collapsing. The Allied advance had outrun its supply lines by over 300 miles. Cherbourg, the main deepwater port, remained damaged and inefficient. The artificial Mulberry harbors at Normandy were either destroyed or nearing capacity. Every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition, had to travel by truck over roads chewed to mud by thousands of vehicles of fragile artery known as the Red Ball Express. At the peak of the advance, Patton's Third Army alone burned 400,000 gallons of fuel per day. Yet daily allocations from SHAEF Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force dwindled to less than a quarter of that. On August 27, Eisenhower's logisticians informed field commanders that fuel would be prioritized not for momentum, but for balance. Patton, fuming, reportedly said, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks can't run on corned beef." Meanwhile, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding the British 21st Army Group in the north, lobbied fiercely for resources to launch his own bold thrust through Belgium and into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. He envisioned a single, decisive blow to end the war. Patton argued for a southern dash into the Saar, then Frankfurt. But Eisenhower, newly installed as ground forces commander on September 1, faced a dilemma: back one audacious general and risk leaving others stranded or spread resources thin across a broad front. That choice would determine not just the pace of victory, but whether victory would come in 1944 at all. Patton's vision was rooted in blitzkrieg logic: speed, surprise, and psychological rupture. He believed that one concentrated armored spearhead, his Third Army, could punch through the thinning German defenses before they solidified along the West Wall. His plan called for a rapid drive east from the Moselle River to the Saar industrial basin, then north toward Frankfurt and the Rhine. Capture Frankfurt, he argued, and Germany's command structure would fracture. Factories would fall silent, morale would collapse. The war could end by December. His confidence wasn't unfounded. In just 1 month, Patton had liberated 60,000 square miles of France with fewer casualties than Montgomery's slower, methodical advance. His troops were battle-hardened, mobile, and eager. He commanded the U.S. Army's most experienced armored divisions like the 4th Armored under Major General John Wood, who operated with an almost intuitive coordination between tanks, infantry, and air support. Yet the human factor extended beyond battlefield prowess. Patton's temperament, brash, impulsive, politically tone-deaf, worked against him. Just 2 years earlier, he'd been sidelined for slapping shell-shocked soldiers in Sicily. Though reinstated, he remained a liability in Allied coalition politics. Eisenhower, ever the diplomat, knew that favoring Patton risked alienating Montgomery and the British War Cabinet, who already chafed at American dominance in manpower and materiel. Then there was the logistical reality. The Red Ball Express, over 6,000 trucks running day and night, was a marvel of improvisation, but it couldn't sustain multiple offensives. Each mile east multiplied fuel consumption exponentially. Engineers calculated that supplying a narrow thrust to the Rhine would require stripping every other front of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. If the spearhead stalled, as Napoleon's had in 1812, it would be stranded, vulnerable, and potentially destroyed. Eisenhower understood war not just as combat, but as supply, diplomacy, and risk management. Patton saw only the battlefield. That difference defined their clash not of courage, but of command philosophy. From the German perspective, the late summer of 1944 was a race against annihilation. After the Falaise collapse, Hitler sacked von Kluge and recalled Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, whom he dismissed months earlier to reorganize the Western Front. Alongside General Walter Model, the Führer's firemen, they began cobbling together new defenses with astonishing speed. Remnant units, Rear-Echelon troops, Luftwaffe ground personnel, and hastily trained Volkssturm militias were funneled into the Westwall, a network of bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and minefields stretching from Switzerland to the Netherlands. They knew the Allies were overextended. German intelligence intercepted radio traffic showing fuel shortages. They gambled that, if they could hold the Moselle and the Siegfried Line for just a few weeks, autumn rains and winter cold would freeze the Allied advance. That window was narrow but real, and Eisenhower's decision to halt Patton played directly into their hands. Montgomery, meanwhile, presented his own version of a narrow-thrust Operation Market Garden. He proposed seizing key bridges in the Netherlands with airborne troops, then racing armored columns across the Rhine into the Ruhr. It was as audacious as Patton's plan, but politically safer. Backing Monty reassured the British government and maintained coalition unity. On September 10th, Eisenhower gave conditional approval. Patton's thrust was denied. Montgomery's would get priority fuel and airlift support. Eisenhower's choice reflected not indecision, but a strategic calculus. A broad front advance minimized the risk of catastrophic defeat if one thrust failed. It kept pressure across the entire line, preventing German reserves from concentrating. And crucially, it upheld the alliance. As Eisenhower later wrote, the best solution was to advance on a wide front, keeping all formations in contact and mutually supporting each other. Yet this prudence came at a cost. While Monty prepared his airborne gamble in the north and Patton cooled his heels in Lorraine, the Germans rebuilt. The moment for a lightning end to the war slipped away like fuel through a cracked drum. September 1, 1944. At SHAEF Forward Headquarters in Versailles, Eisenhower made his final decision. Patton's request for a single-thrust advance into Germany was denied. Instead, all army groups would advance generally eastward, with limited priority given to Montgomery's northern thrust, soon to be codenamed Operation Market Garden. Patton received just enough fuel to probe the Moselle River defenses, but not to cross in force. His armored divisions, poised like coiled strings, were ordered to hold. The consequences were immediate. On September 7th, Third Army reached the Moselle near Metz, fortress city Hitler had declared impregnable, without sufficient fuel or air support. Patton's assault stalled against thick concrete pillboxes and German 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division. Rain turned the Loire-en-Plaine into a quagmire. Tanks sank axle-deep. Infantry waded through mud under artillery fire. What Patton had hoped would be a rapid penetration became a brutal war of attrition. Meanwhile, 300 miles north, Market Garden launched on September 17th. 3 airborne divisions dropped behind enemy lines to seize bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. British the 30th Corps raced north in a narrow corridor, Hell's Highway, to link up with them. For 3 days, success seemed possible, but German resistance at Arnhem, underestimated by Allied intelligence, proved fatal. The British 1st Airborne Division was encircled and decimated. By September 25th, the operation was abandoned. The Rhine remained uncrossed. Eisenhower's gamble had failed. Yet still, he did not redirect resources south to Patton. The broad front strategy held. Daily, supply convoys that might have fueled a dash to Frankfurt instead crawled towards static positions across France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. German engineers used the reprieve to reinforce the West Wall with fresh troops, artillery, and Panther tanks pulled from quieter sectors. By early October, the Siegfried Line bristled with renewed menace. Patton, ever the dramatist, wrote in his diary, "Had we been allowed to go, we could have walked into Germany." Military historians would later note that on September 1st, only 49 understrength German battalions stood between Third Army and the Rhine. By November, that number had tripled. By mid-September 1944, the momentum that had carried the Allies from Normandy to the German frontier had evaporated. Patton's Third Army, once the spearhead of liberation, was mired in the bloody siege of Metz, a city it would not fully secure until late November. Each day of delay allowed the Wehrmacht to strengthen its positions. Mines were laid in depth, anti-tank ditches were dug. Concrete bunkers, many untouched since 1940, were reoccupied and rearmed. The West Wall, once dismissed as obsolete, now loomed as a formidable barrier. Eisenhower's broad front strategy ensured no single Allied army was catastrophically exposed, but it also ensured none could deliver a decisive blow. Resources remained thinly spread. On September 22, Eisenhower allocated just 1,000 gallons of fuel per division per day, barely enough for local patrols. Patton, forced to ration even his reconnaissance units, later remarked bitterly, "I could have taken the whole damn German army prisoner if I'd had the gas." The cost of caution mounted. In Lorraine alone, the U.S. 3rd and 7th Armies suffered over 70,000 casualties between September and December, most in grinding, frontal assaults against fortified towns like Brest, Fort Driant, and the Hurtgen Forest further north. These were not battles of maneuver, but of attrition, the very kind Patton had sought to avoid. Worse, the delay gave Hitler time to conceive and prepare the Ardennes offensive. By early December, German forces had secretly massed 25 divisions, including nearly 1,000 tanks, along a quiet sector of the Belgian frontier, held by inexperienced American troops. On December 16, they struck. The Battle of the Bulge erupted, catching Allied intelligence completely off guard. It became the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the United States in World War II, with over 89,000 American casualties. Ironically, it was Patton who would help stem the crisis, executing a stunning 90-degree pivot north with Third Army in winter conditions to relieve the besieged town of Bastogne. His speed under pressure vindicated his doctrine of relentless offense. Yet that very capacity had been restrained months earlier, when the war might have ended without the snows of Bastogne ever falling. The decisive breakthrough never came in 1944. Instead, the Allies crossed the Rhine only in March 1945, 4 months after Patton's window of opportunity had vanished in the Lorraine mud. The war would grind on, costing hundreds of thousands more lives. The immediate consequences of Eisenhower's decision were measured in lives, terrain, and time. Between September 1944 and January 1945, the Western Allies suffered over 300,000 casualties in what military historian Russell Weigley later called the slow, grinding war of attrition that Eisenhower had hoped to avoid. Patton's Third Army alone lost more men in the Lorraine campaign than in the entire breakout from Normandy. Metz, finally captured on November 22, yielded little strategic gain, its rail hubs to damage to support a major offensive. German forces, meanwhile, used the autumn to rebuild. By December, the Wehrmacht had stabilized the Western Front, with over 40 divisions, many reconstituted from shattered units that had escaped Normandy. The West Wall, once lightly held, now bristled with artillery, mines, and fanatical defenders. Hitler's gamble in the Ardennes, though ultimately doomed, succeeded in delaying the Allied advance into Germany by months. Even Eisenhower acknowledged the cost. In a December 1944 letter to General Marshall, he admitted, "We missed a golden opportunity in September." Field Marshal Montgomery, in his memoirs, conceded that Patton's instinct for exploitation was unmatched. Yet the decision stood not as a failure of judgment, but as a reflection of coalition warfare's harsh realities. The war that could have ended with autumn leaves falling on quiet German towns instead bled into winter, snow covering the frozen dead from the Bulge to the Vosges. In the war's aftermath, Patton's rejected plan became a cornerstone of military debate. Historians like Martin Blumenson and Carlo D'Este argued that a concentrated thrust in early September, backed by even modest logistical priority, could have breached the Rhine before German defenses coalesced. The U.S. Army's official history noted that Germany was more vulnerable in September 1944 than at any time before or after. Yet others, including Eisenhower's biographer John Edward Smith, defended the broad front approach as the only politically and militarily sustainable option. Supply constraints were real. The Allies lacked the port capacity to sustain multiple deep offensives. And risking a single army deep in enemy territory without secure flanks or air cover during autumn weather could have invited disaster, not victory. The episode reshaped post-war doctrine. The U.S. Army emphasized combined arms mobility, logistics integration, and the need for operational art that balanced audacity with sustainability. Patton's aggression was admired, but never again left unchecked. Meanwhile, Eisenhower's leadership was vindicated by ultimate victory, though at a higher human cost. Diplomatically, the decision preserved the Anglo-American alliance, a fragile coalition that might have fractured under the strain of perceived American favoritism. In the end, the rejection of Patton's plan was not a verdict on his genius, but a recognition that modern war is fought not only on battlefields, but in supply depots, strategy rooms, and the silent calculus of alliance politics. In the end, Patton's rejected plan reveals a timeless tension in warfare, the clash between boldness and balance, between the lightning strike and the steady march. His vision was not fantasy, it was grounded in momentum, psychology, and the brutal logic of pursuit. Yet Eisenhower saw a larger battlefield, one where diplomacy, logistics, and coalition unity were as vital as tanks and courage. The war was not lost in September 1944, but it was prolonged. And in that delay, the cost of caution became the burden of history. What might have been remains one of World War II's most haunting questions, not of what failed, but of what was never allowed to succeed.